Hey guys, so it seems my videos can hardly keep up with my builds, and by the time I post this video I'll be almost half done with my next build, just cooking builds like there's no tomorrow. And I'm mostly doing off meta builds or trying out less popular mechanics, just like this build. And I have quite a lot of builds already planned up, so if you don't want to miss my videos, make sure you subscribe. And I would say ring the bell, but the bell sometimes doesn't work either. But enough about that, let's talk about the build. So I had that dual strike was pretty decent for the clear speed, and I wanted to investigate and see it for myself, and I must say I have mixed feelings about this. I went with the Slayer because of a couple reasons. I wanted more AoE, and I was going with the crit build with pretty bad base crit weapon, and Slayer is perfect for that. Since this league buffed Rebuke of the Vaal to almost insane numbers, each of these swords can have up to 1000 DPS, so I wanted to use those and then just do elemental dual strike, but for the most part focusing on cold damage. And these flashy visuals that you see are from the Herald of Ice, Celestial Herald MTX. So to better explain why I have mixed feelings about dual strike, let's take a look at the dual strike itself. So with dual strike you are actually dealing 2 hits in one attack, I guess. You basically hit the both weapons at the same time. I'm mentioning this because some people may think about some kind of ignite build, but it's not gonna work better because it's not gonna stack both weapons into one big hit. So the cool part about dual strike is that it's gaining a bit of crit multiplier, critical strike chance, quite a decent chunk, and also you get more critical strike chance against enemies that are on full life, and more damage with hits and ailments against enemies that are on full life. So the first hit against full life enemy will be very strong. In fact, if you crit and roll Ruthless proc on the first hit, with this build against Shaper you will deal more than 1 million damage in just one hit. Well, technically 2 hits. And this makes map clear feel pretty great. Even in tier 16 maps with 50% more monster life, I can still one-shot most of the enemies. However, the drawback is that with dual strike you only have 70% of base attack speed, and that feels pretty bad against bosses. With Rage on and Ancestral Protector out, I only have 3.23 attacks per second. While mapping I do have more because Onslaught, Frenzy Charges and Slayer's speed buff, but the moment you try to fight stronger bosses or very tough rare enemies, especially if something slows you down, it just becomes kind of meh. I don't know how to explain this. Maybe it is because I'm building elemental build and bosses or tougher rares that have more elemental resistance just feels bad. They feel much more tankier. In fact, I don't even have any elemental penetration. I did plan with it, but in the end other nodes were giving more damage. Also, while leveling early levels it felt pretty bad to level with dual strike. When I put on Rebuke of the Vaal swords it did feel great, but then I reached higher levels and in red tier maps it started feeling kind of lame again against bosses. Clear speed is still fine, but bossing is, I really don't like bossing, so I'm probably finishing this build sooner than I expected. And my advice, if you're building dual strike, maybe consider using different swords that are faster base, and maybe not even going with the Slayer and going with some faster Ascendancy class. Maybe a pure physical gladiator would work better, or Berserker, but with Berserker you would probably have less crit chance. And as a Slayer I only took Impact Node from Uberlab, and the clear speed felt fine until then. I assume Impact Node mostly helps with the Herald of Ice explosions. And in fact this build feels almost like playing Glacial Hammer, but Glacial Hammer will probably have even better clear speed. But even with this build I can still perma-freeze bosses. Not the biggest bosses of course, but most of the map bosses get frozen. Also this build felt kind of squishy, and it is probably because Legion buff reworked melee and enemies started hitting harder but slower, so when you try to face tank you definitely feel bigger hits coming to you. And with this build you are kind of forced into melee range and face tanking enemies almost all the time. It is definitely much harder to sidestep dangerous enemy attacks when you are attacking so slowly, like 3-4 attacks per second only. Now the price of this build is actually not that high. 2 Rebuke of the Vaal are the only kind of expensive items. Not really expensive, the price has gone down quite a lot now. You can probably buy a decent roll, the Rebuke of the Vaal, for like 50-60 chaos each. And the rest of the items I got Sacrificial Garb 6-link body armor from divination cards, which is kind of cheap, and then try to fossil craft some life and resistances. And the rest items just life, resistances and elemental damage of attacks wherever you can get. Oh, and I do have 25% physical damage converted to lightning damage gloves. You cannot get 50% anymore. If you get these gloves from the temple and try to craft bench craft another conversion, version, it will say that it already has that mod and you cannot craft it. But it doesn't really matter, I don't have a lot of physical damage, I still wanted to get a bit more conversion. For the flasks, Diamond Flask, Sulfur and Atziri's Promise. Now, the dual strike doesn't actually need melee splash, but I am using Ancestral Call, which I do swap to Ruthless against big bosses. The reason you don't need melee splash is that there is a threshold jewel for dual strike, Might and Influence. Dual strike has 20% chance to deal double damage with main hand weapon, and dual strike deals offhand splash damage to surrounding targets. By the way, while leveling it was very nice to use Story of the Vaal blade in the offhand. And that weapon says, hits with this weapon always ignites, freezes and shocks. The word always means you get 100% chance. It doesn't bypass any of the other mechanics, it just gives you 100% chance to shock, freeze and ignite. And that weapon guaranteed Herald of Ice explosions, which helped with the clear speed. And I actually used Story of the Vaal all the way until I could put Rebuke of the Vaal. So my dual strike is currently linked with elemental damage of attacks, added cold damage, close combat, fortify and ancestral call, which I do swap to Ruthless against big bosses. Just a quick note, Path of Building does not properly calculate close combat. So to simulate that for single target hitting skills, in Path of Building I added level 40 hypothermia and selected against shield enemies. Now the close combat, the minimum range at which you get maximum damage is 15 units. And this build has 14 weapon range, which means if you use Ruthless, you will always be at the best distance at which you get the maximum damage from close combat. The maximum distance at which you get the least damage from close combat is 40 units. Now the other things that I'm using, Hatred, Precision level depends on how much mana you have, Herald of Ice with Quality, Ancestral Protector, Blood Rage, Frostbomb. Actually Frostbomb does give quite a lot of damage, since I am heavily focusing on cold damage. For defenses I have Cast when damage taken linked with Immortal Call, Flash Offering to destroy corpses that have not been destroyed by shattering, and enfeeble. I also do have a helmet with 10% of physical damage from hits taken as fire damage for a bit more extra physical damage mitigation. And of course, like I said, I do have Fortify. I did have to get one of the rings with minus to total mana cost of skills, and the other ring is Mark of the Elder because that just gives the most damage. My amulet also has cold damage leech as life, because otherwise I don't really have reach. Also I do have around 3.6k armor because I'm using iron reflexes, that's without the flasks. And that's the rest of my passive skill tree. I will include Path of Building import code in the descriptions as always. And I guess that covers it. I think I really don't like dual strike. If I would just use it for clear speed it would feel kinda fine. But I want overall versatile build which can clear and deal with bosses. And of course this build does have a very nice damage, and Shaper should not be a problem ever, but it just didn't feel right to me. So that's all. My next build most likely gonna be Reign of Pharaohs, or should I say double Reign of Pharaohs. But since I'm not big fan of buffs, I'm probably not gonna play that build for very long. So thank you for watching and I think I'll see you soon. Subscribe.